Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you can find your seats, we'll get started. This is a very popular panel. Popular panel. I love it. Thank you very much for being here. Come on in. Would you like to find a seat? Can I get you a seat? Can I pick one out for you? Trying to figure out what this is. This is a diversity panel.
Thank you for sharing your talent.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for coming and being here and sharing your talent. Okay, here we go. All right. Whew. And a hush falls over the crowd. Okay, so something super important for our super conference, of course, and something that is at the forefront of much of our world, outside and inside the theater, of course, is diversity, right? And so now we're going to have the diversity panel, diversity in the arts. I'm just going to get to it and not yak up here. Please welcome to the stage your moderator, Morgan Marcel, and your panelists, Arvind Ethan. Make sure that you walk around here. I didn't talk to the panelists yet. Oh, you did? Okay, great. Sorry. It's like stage man. You know what you're doing. I'm sorry. So, Morgan Marcel and Arvind Ethan, David, Aisha Jackson, Douglas Lyons, and Melvin Tunstall III. Give them a round of applause, everybody. Welcome, yeah. Welcome.
Yeah, we have water. We're
Hi,
professionals.
everybody. Ooh, good morrow.
Hi, everybody. I'm Morgan. I will be your moderator. I would love just to start for each of you to introduce yourself. I know, he said your names, but maybe something you're working on now and what initially got you into the arts, whether it was, your parents forcing you to be in a play or a college class or whatever it is that inspired you to do what you do.
Cool. Hello. I'm Arvind. I spent most of my life in film and television. I live in LA, but I made my Broadway debut this season. I'm one of the lead producers of Jagged Little Pill, which is in previews at the moment.
Yeah.
I love that so much. And it's funny to ask about what got me into it because I, having just produced my first musical, I'm starting to think about, okay, where did my love for musicals begin? And I figured out that the first two musicals I saw at the age of 3. I saw the first production of Evita in the West End in London with Elaine Page and Jonathan Pryce. And last night, I saw Sammy Cannell's amazing new production of it. And if you haven't seen it, go see it. It excavates the play and the real Eva Peron like nothing ever does. And then the second musical I ever saw was Grease, the movie. Same year, same summer. So those are my two starting points in musical theater, and that's what brought me here.
Awesome. Hi. Let's see. You said something we're currently working on. I'm currently the standby for Anna in Frozen on Broadway. Woo! I am going on twice today.
And she's still here.
This is her warm-up. She's like,
Good morning. Good morning. You guys are important, so we're here. Let's see. My brother came home one day, and his school was doing a production of Once on This Island. We all went to a performing arts high school in Georgia. I'm from Georgia. And he came home, and they needed a little T-Moon, or the little girl that's like in the show. So he came home, and he was like, okay, do you want to audition for my director? They need somebody to do this. And I was like, okay. I was in the 6th grade, and it was just something I had seen my brothers doing growing up. So I was like, of course. And he taught me the songs, and we went through everything, and I went and auditioned, and then I got it. And it was so funny because when I got in the room and I saw Big T Moon, I was like, well, I want to do that. But I was like, okay, here we are. But yeah, that was my first introduction to musical theater, but I have a musical family. We all sing, so it was just something that I grew up doing in church with my dad and my mom and my siblings. Yeah.
All right. I'm Douglas Lyons. Very happy to be here. I just wrapped up with Melvin, Beautiful the Carole King musical, which I was in and out of since the original company. Really awesome. I also have become a writer in the last 5 years, which is part of the reason I asked for us to have this panel as well, because I think the other side of the table is very important. I got into theater officially my senior year in high school, where I originated the role of Tony in West Side Story. Thank you so much. So the Jets were black and the Sharks were Latino because of our demographic and our program, and the story was still told, and I inappropriately riffed so much. And I'll leave you with that. Okay.
Inappropriate riffs. I'm Melvin Tunstall III. I grew up in the South as well, and literally behind a church, like at the end of a dirt road, my entire family sang, and my father had a friend at work who heard about auditions for the Children's Theater. They were doing a production of A Christmas Carol. It was a play, but I went in and I sang for them, and they cast me as the Ghost of Christmas Present, and then they added like a solo in Act 2 for me to sing. And that was really fun because it was like the first time that I wasn't around my family, because I'm actually the worst singer in my family. Like, all of my cousins are amazing. And so like to finally like be on stage by myself and people applaud for me, I was like, yes, I love this. I'm doing this forever. And so I was here when the towers fell. Like I went, and so I actually left New York as a performer because there were not a lot of jobs, and moved back down south and started teaching and directing, and I started writing. I wrote my first musical in 2007 down in the South. And once New York rebuilt itself, I came back to the city, got lucky enough to make my Broadway debut in Beautiful with Douglas. And we met like the first day. He was one of the very first people I ever met. And then 2 years later, we started writing together. And I was the swing in the show. And so when I would be downstairs while Douglas was on stage performing, I'd be down there writing away. He'd come down, read something, give me notes, go back upstairs and do the show. And I'm downstairs writing. And so when we closed the show, it was really quite, a full circle moment, because we had met there. I had made my debut. We become writing partners, and now here we are.
They both worked backstage very hard. I also did Beautiful with them for a little
this
while.
is true. That's right.
And I would always see them downstairs with their computer just like working tirelessly. So it's really cool to see them perform, but also behind the scenes making sure they're feeding their other gifts as well.
Yeah. And you did the first table read of Polka Dots.
Polka Dots,
yeah.
yes.
Like our very, very, very first one. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that going on. But, that's the beauty of Broadway, is that your friends really don't say no, or they can't say no. Like, will you do this? You don't have really an option.
You mentioned, the older Timon and kind of maybe looking up to her or wanting to become that role. Do you guys have people that you have looked up to, whether it's now or when you were growing up, maybe mentors, or I think it's really important to see yourself in your leaders. And so did you have that experience? Were there specific people that you looked up to as you made your way in the industry?
That same performing arts high school that my brothers went to, I ended up going to, and so did an actress by the name of Jakina Calacango. She was the Nettie in the revival of Color Purple, and she's currently in Slave Play right now. And so seeing her, she was Aida in one of our productions, and I got to understudy her, and like watching her work and like make all these choices, and like she was just amazing. And so to watch her do that and then be able to like understudy her and go on myself doing that show made me realize that I wanted to pursue musical theater for like a career. And then coming to New York and seeing the way that she's paved, and like seeing her journey, and just like seeing her shine and be able to tell her story, and like also see someone from where I'm from who looks like me, who is just like making an impact. That was so encouraging. I went to go see her show the other day, and it was just, anytime I get to see her and other women from where I'm from, and just like women period, and women of color like shining like that, representation matters. And so that Jakina, she's my source of encouragement and inspiration. Yeah.
The rest of you? I know, Arvin, yours might be more in film, but...
Well, it's interesting because, mentorship doesn't have to be race specific. And I've been very lucky in my mentors, but it is true. It enormously helps if you can see people who look like you doing the thing you want to do. And it helps both in terms of inspiration, and it helps in terms of just understanding that those jobs exist and are accessible. And like, I remember as an Indian person, there are very few people. It's not an area that my people have ever looked at seriously, for whatever reason. And I remember Art Malik, who's a British Indian actor, became famous for True Lies, where he plays the terrorist. He always plays the terrorist. That's one thing that you get used to. And I remember seeing him and going, okay, there's an Indian person in theater. That's interesting and exciting. 20 years later, I hired Art to be in a movie, and it turns out I didn't need to have been looking up to him for 20 years. Quick aside. And then, much later, when Lost started, there's a wonderful Indian actor in Lost who plays an Iraqi. I'm blanking on his name. Can anyone remember? Anyone remember? Yeah,
I'm sure everyone knows who you're talking about.
Naveen Andrews.
Oh, there.
And Naveen's like 7 or 8 years older than me, and he looks like my much better looking elder brother. And I remember as Lost was like becoming a phenomenon, I had a very nice time walking into bars and going, "Are you Naveen Andrews? Hi." But no, it was hard. It was certainly hard to find, just to even know the jobs existed. Like I remember when I started out, I thought I was going to be a director because I knew that job existed, and at some point, someone I was working, my producer on a show, we were having an argument about the marketing and the ticketing, and he was like, "If you care so much about marketing and ticketing, you should be a producer." And I'm like, "What's a producer?" So then I started learning about that, and it turns out, yeah, I do quite like that stuff too. So it's weird just to know the jobs exist. I mean, acting is a job you can see; it's visible. Writing is a job people have. I mean, my parents still don't know what I do. I had this very weird conversation with them this week because the show just opened, and they're saying, "When should we come and see it?" And I'm saying, "Oh, well, maybe they hate the cold." So I'm like, "Don't come right now. Come in June." And I'm like, "Oh, if you come in June, maybe we can organize and you can come to the Tonys." And my mother literally turns to my father and goes, "He is winning an award." And my father goes, no, he's just going to an award ceremony. I'm like, well, both things could happen. They're like, what did you do? Did you write it? No, Diablo Cody wrote it. Did you direct it? No, Diane Paulus directed it. So what did you do? So someone here call my parents should be at this conference.
There's a lot of, from the acting perspective, there's a lot of role models out there, but what sort of broke my heart from the writing perspective is that if I were to ask all of you to name your 5 contemporary musical theater composers of color, it would take us a little while to figure that out. Mm-hmm. And part of the blessing of meeting Melvin is having a camp, a crew, to navigate that space. There's Michael R. Jackson, there's Stu, there's George C. Wolfe, but in proportion to other races, that space does not really exist for us. And so that's been sort of my inspiration. I'm currently doing a workshop of American Prophet, which is Marcus Hummon, who wrote God Bless the Broken Road. I don't know if you know that song. He's the composer on it, and Charles Randolph Wright, who is the director of Motown, is directing that. And I told him, I was here on Sunday in another space for Maurice Hines. They did a documentary called Bring Them Back, and Charles executive produced that, and I told him after the film, I said, "You're my Maurice. You're going to be my mentor because I need that. I need an example that it is possible." And so, writing-wise, I'm still looking for that hero, that person to pave the way in contemporary theater right now. There have been many before us, but yeah.
You're probably actually becoming that for everyone else, which is
That's
great.
what I was going to say.
Which is
Yeah,
great.
maybe you're it.
Me included.
It's already
I mean, of course. I think for me, probably the biggest influence was Jeffrey Holder. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that name, but responsible for the huge success of The Wiz. He was Punjab in the movie of Annie, Make 7 Up Yours. Had that deep, resonant voice. But when I was growing up, let's see, I'm going to age myself, but I used to go to the library and check out books. And there was this amazing book on Broadway, and there was a picture of Jeffrey Holder. I would never forget it. I mean, he's just in all black. He has this wow, I'm really dressed like him. He has this like shawl on. And he's standing on the stage at the Wiz, but the caption said director, choreographer, designer, Jeffrey Holder. And it was the first time I had seen a black man multi-hyphenated in that way. And growing up, everyone would always say, Melvin, you're gonna be on Broadway, you're gonna be on Broadway. And I'd go, yes, but there's more. There's something more that I wanna do. And seeing that picture, and seeing the possibilities of you could do, because he was also a performer and then directed and designed, he was an artist, like he just was so talented, and not feeling boxed and you just need to sing or act, just gave me this kind of freedom to explore those other avenues. And my hometown in North Carolina brought Jeffrey down to do an exhibit of his paintings, and when it was time to bring them back to New York, I got a call to help him move the paintings in so that I could finally meet this man that I had idolized. And I walk into his apartment, and he's there talking, you know, all low, ha ha ha. And I walk in, and he just stops, and he says, well, I've never seen myself walk into a room before. Oh my God. And I just stop, and we had a conversation, and in the couple of years later, before he passed away, he just allowed me to dream and to talk and to ask any question. And I would always say, you know, I really think I want to write a musical and produce them. And he would say, do it. I said, okay, I really want to. Well, Melvin, do it. And he said, that's the hardest thing about being an artist, is the doing. Everybody wants to be a writer, but no one will sit down and actually write. And I always say, when people say, what's the hardest part? I'm like, the writing, because you're sitting there staring at a blank page, and it's just, you know, a cursor blinking at you, like challenging you to fill up the page. And it's in those times that I always go back to Jeffrey saying, you just have to do it. You have to do it, and don't feel like you have to just be a performer, or, you know, or even just be a writer. Like, do all of the things that, you know, your heart desires, and allow that expression to come out of you. So Jeffrey's my fave.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, I have a lot of questions, so maybe briefly, about your kind of first time running into any adversity on your way to the success that you've found today? Maybe a moment or an experience that you've had.
Oh, I got a good one. So I will not name the director nor tour, but I was right out of college. I did a show that toured, that started at the Apollo. I'll give you that much. And
Do your
I
research.
was an understudy for the role of I was an understudy, and I was told to my face, you're way too young for this, but since you're here, I'm gonna give you some advice, is what he said to me. And I went, oh, okay. You know, I think some of the toughest stuff is the things that people say to you that I don't think they realize is actually seeping into your spirit and your mind. Words have power. So that was really rough to hear. But then I went on mid-show in Tokyo, and the next time he saw me, he was like, "Oh my God, look at you!" And I was like, yeah, because I saved the show at that moment. That was a really rough moment for me, but those bruises help, because there's a lot of tough things that will be thrown at you, especially in the skin, when people aren't necessarily trying to be mean. You know, sometimes they're trying to relate to you. They have literally maybe never seen a person of color in person, so their first experience is like, fried chicken, you know, like they go there, but that's only because and so I've learned to navigate people not being rude, but sometimes they're just ignorant, and sometimes you have to educate them and go, you know, there was a girl in Beautiful who she's the sweetest, and we've worked with her many times, but she made a really ignorant comment, and we had to pull her aside and say, hey, just don't assume, you know.
This kind of leads me to the follow-up question for this is, you know, it's kind of like a category of like pushing through discomfort in this conversation. And I did, I want to allow you to answer the other question, but I did a panel on diversity, and a young man in the audience raised his hand and said, you know, I just did an episode of Mrs. Maisel, and I went into the hair team, and they were like, here's some coconut oil. We're good. Like, I don't know what else to do for your hair. And he was so mortified, it was his first TV gig, so he didn't know what to say. And so his question was, how do you educate those that might be a little bit ignorant or not know how to have the conversation without feeling or them feeling like you're attacking them or you're being accusatory. In your experience, is there a good way to broach that conversation?
I feel like the fact that we have to have those conversations is frustrating and annoying in itself.
Absolutely.
But there's definitely an eloquent and professional way to approach it. Make sure that you are heard, make sure that you are seen. And for me, I just did this podcast and we were talking about the way that I answer ignorant people who decide to tell me that Anna can't be portrayed by a person of color. I have the job and I am a person of color, so clearly it can be. But sometimes in those instances, I think that in his instance, he needs to clearly speak up and say something. I think sometimes for performers, it's just good to allow your gifts and your talent to speak for itself and just be, I have the job, here I am, I'm gonna do it because there is someone in the audience who looks like me who needs to see themselves portrayed and represented in a positive way. But the question for the podcast that I was doing, he was just like, well, you just always answer in such elegant and eloquent ways. And I was like, well, in those moments, it doesn't behoove me to get upset and attack that person. I think that we should lead with love and light. And I can sit that person down and say, okay, yes, my hair, my wigs for the show are not the same color as the wigs for the Anna that you're used to seeing. But Disney and the hair supervisor for the show gave me an option about what I wanted to choose. And for me, I was like, oh, I want to make sure that little girls who come and see me that look like me see themselves fully represented. And also, I'm a person of color. I know Black women that have red hair and they look great, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted them to just see themselves fully represented. And so in that moment, I took the second to say, I was given permission to do this and this is why I did it. And then if that person decides to continue being ignorant, cool. Thank you. Goodbye. But, I do think there is a way that we can answer that without attacking them or without because at the end of the day, I still have my job and whatever they say is not going to take that away from me. But I can take a second to educate and try to look, let's sit down and let me tell you this is hurtful and the way that you're speaking is not okay. And people who look like me deserve to see themselves just as much as you deserve to see yourself represented. So let's have this discussion and then we go from there. And if you don't want to listen and you don't want to hear, then cool. But I can try so that it doesn't happen to somebody else, so that you don't go on behaving like this thinking that it's okay, because it's not.
I think it's the way you just described that is so enormously useful, because whilst we can all feel outrage and righteous outrage all the time, it's not, as our politics is teaching us, it's not a useful communication tool, right? And particularly in the context of art and of entertainment, being furious and angry at each other it's sort of a weird cognitive dissonance. I mean, my perspective on this is a slightly odd one in that I'm accustomed and used to being the only person of color in a lot of the rooms that I work in, but I have the privilege that I'm also normally the boss or one of the senior people in the room. But even then, I have to be careful about my outrage. I have been in marketing meetings where I've been presented with ideas and visuals that are racist. And I have to find a way to point out to a room of bright and well-meaning and liberal and progressive, but very white marketing executives, why this thing they are doing is racist. And it's normally an interesting moment because I could just get angry. And sometimes I do, but I try not to, because it's not useful to have your boss angry at you when you're trying your best to do a good job. And so it becomes educational. It's like, hey, go read this stuff. Here's the history of the treatment of people of color in marketing. Here's the history of whitewashing. Go read that shit and then come back and show me these images again. Because a lot of people don't know it. It's amazing.
Yeah, maybe you guys could speak to, as Arvin's saying, in a lot of the rooms that he's in, maybe being on the creative team and the people that are creating these ideas and having to pitch your ideas to maybe a room of, well-meaning, potentially white, probably men, how does that feel, and how do you broach those kinds of conversations, or have you had to?
Again, and it's a weird spot that I'm into because I've been in and out of Beautiful for the past 6 years, and some writing things have really taken off. And suddenly you find yourself like on the DreamWorks lot in a room with 4 or 5 white people that you just met, pitching a project because someone heard your music online, and then you've done this like 1.5-year process. And I've never been in that room before, right? So sometimes, unfortunately, especially as writers of color or actors of color, our first opportunity in a big moment is the first time we've ever had it. We didn't have the high school leads and roles in college to get us there, to prepare us for those moments. So what I've learned to do is try to calm myself and know that I'm walking into a room with authority, and that I'm there because I might be the first, which is one of the songs in our show, Polka Dots. And so I owe it to everyone behind me to lay it down and to own the room in a very respectful way. But it is difficult because from the writing perspective, the majority of artistic directors around the country and non-for-profits in New York are white people. And so you're not just convincing them that they should do your work, but that maybe your work, which has maybe nothing to do with race, but you're a person of color, still should be seen, although it's not about race. Because a lot of writing pieces get pigeonholed into, but like, we're looking for a black slot, and yes, you're black, but like, this is not, and it's like, but I'm human.
Work's not black enough.
Yeah, I'm human, so let's tell the story. And I think part of diversity is what we see on stage, not who's behind the stage or behind the table, and that's the mistake, I think, as well, that the theater's like, oh my, Hamilton happened, we did it, we rule. And it's like, no, but if you think of the blackest shows in musical theater, Once on This Island, Dreamgirls, The Wiz was written by, oh yeah. But like most black shows in theater were written by white people.
And have producers and creators.
Entirely produced by white people.
Yeah,
Entirely invested in by white people.
Yeah.
That's the norm.
And it's not that we ain't here. It's how do we get over, the hump? How do you make space for people of color like this to just have the conversation and say, yes, we have made, moments forward and we've pushed forward, but there's so much work to be done.
We're gonna get to audience questions. I'm sure you have a lot. So I didn't see any of the markers of like 10 minutes left, 15 minutes left. So I just saw 5 minutes. So I'm gonna ask the hardest question I have, I think, or the most interesting potentially to me. As creators, as artists and also creators of theater and film, TV and film, are you most interested in creating pieces that success is reliant on minority group stories? It's reliant on the race or the gender or whatever minority the story is talking about? Or do you feel like you're interested in telling a story where a minority group is irrelevant, in that it doesn't matter what your race is or your gender is or your disability is or your sexuality is?
And I think for me, it's about writing humanity. I always use an example of, if we're going to be very broad and do some stereotypes, like, let's say you're writing black people, we're going to love the fried chicken. You're writing white people, we're going to love grilled chicken over here. And I always say, I don't want to write the chicken, I want to write the hunger that we all feel. Because we all understand hunger, no matter what you're going to go off and eat. And for me, that's something that Doug was just saying, that sometimes in my work, because it's not race-driven completely, I've run into the issue of it doesn't fit in our black slot or our person of color slot, because it really is about humanity or fantasy. Like I love writing for family theater, very Melvin does Disney, Aisha. And so it's not always, complete, a point of view that people are expecting, especially because, I grew up in the South, an affluent family. I had a great life. I grew up behind a church, and I didn't have some of the normal struggles that people want to see people of color on stage pursue. And so my quest is to really start to write different stories about people of color that really focus on the humanity and helping us as a nation understand that we are much more alike than we give ourselves credit for. Like, our humanity is the same regardless of culture and how, and differences of, foods or music or style. Like, at the end of the day, we all get hungry. So let's find that kind of avenue, because that's important. And I think that's how we're going to get more stories of color out there, because at the end of the day, it is a business. And I think a lot of times, because the Black community doesn't always seem like the ticket buyers, even though when you produce something that people of color want to see, we will come to the theater. That can also be a challenge, because we haven't always been seen as the money makers. And it's a business. You want to have a show out there. You want people to buy tickets, and you want to make money. Producers, that's the beauty of being a producer. So it's now helping those rooms see we can bring an audience, but you really have to meet the patrons where they want, for the shows that they want to see.
What was the question again?
I know
was
it was a
beautiful.
multi-layered one. Are you most interested in making projects, where minority groups are telling their own stories, where the content is based on the minority group? Or are you more interested in a story where the fact that an actor or a producer or whoever is of a minority is irrelevant?
I think the issue is that, and I sort of had this epiphany, is that when the American musical theater canon was being created, right, it was on top of racism. So really talented musicians who might have been Indian or Latino or African American were not even allowed into the rooms or spaces to become a part of the canon. So that blew my mind, like, oh, there's so much work to be done. Like, we're writing the canon now, and social media helps that. What happens is, when there's an Asian story, it gets, The King and I, the Miss Saigon, the Dream Girl, right? The In the Heights, right? We get categorized for our race first before our humanity. And that is what's sad, is that we need space that, if I do want to tell a story, like I have a very Black family comedy called Chicken and Biscuits, which is about two sisters who show up to their father's funeral to find out they have another sister, right? Cool. Then I have this other show, Beau, that we did at the Adirondack Theater Festival, which is primarily a white cast, but written by partially by a Black man. And there are people of color in that story, but you would assume, based on what you see, that it was written by a white person, but it wasn't. But that's how we've trained our audiences, is we relate to race by what we see.
Right.
I'm over it.
I think I have a hard time with that, and that was, kind of the reason that I asked the question. Seeing The King and I, or The Color Purple, or where people are categorized for the race, and the success of that show is because everyone knows that it's about that race. It's important, I think, because we need to show that those can be successful, and that's the sad part. But I'm having trouble with that idea right now, and I would love to get to a place where it's just the best person for the job gets the job.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you go and see a show that has a fully Black cast, or a full cast of color, it becomes a Black show, or this show, But when you go see a show that is a full cast of white people, it's just a show. And it's like, okay, why can't we just tell stories? And I think, to answer your question, I want both. I want us to be invited in the room. I want us to walk into these rooms and be the people behind the table, telling stories about our race and telling stories about I want us all to be included in the conversation, but I also want us to stop being boxed out from playing just humans, that don't have to have a specific race or age or this or that. If it's a part that can be played by a woman, you should see women of all colors. If it is a man that can be played by a man, I think that we go straight to it needs to be a character that is based around that race or something for it to be a person of color, and that's not true. If we're playing humans. Yeah, Anna is a person. And she's goofy, and she speaks her mind, and she is loving and caring. And so anybody who fits that should be able to be seen for that part and actually considered, not just brought into the room so that we can check off our box and say that we saw all people of many colors. And this was no, actually consider these people. When they called me in for Frozen, I was like, they want to see me for, oh, okay. And I was calling for the role of Elsa first. And I was like, really? They're going to make Elsa a person of color. But the fact that I even had that thought, there's something wrong. I should have just been like, oh, cool. I'm going in for a character that can be played by any color.
Me? So the answer has to be we want both. Because ghettoization of any kind is dangerous, and the idea that if you're a person of color, you can only write, produce, or direct work of color is ghettoization. I mean, I made a joke, we were talking like, why are we the only people on this panel? Couldn't there be a white person on this panel talking about their experience trying to work in a not diverse enough Broadway? Why could, and why the concentration of people of color on this panel as opposed to every other panel that's happening today? But at the same time, we want a safe space where we can talk about this stuff. So there's a problem. The casting thing, really interestingly, I'll be very quick at this because I know we want to go to the floor. I have this debate all the time as a writer and as a producer about character descriptions in scripts. Because there's one viewpoint, and I have many friends who are writers of color who have this viewpoint, and I respect it, and they say, we will write in that we want this character to be Asian, we want this character to be black, as a way of knowing that there's a default that everyone gets to be white unless you specify otherwise, so we're going to definitely load it in and give them like names, like Chinese surnames, so it's clear. Like there's a very funny story about Rick and Morty where there's a character with a Chinese surname and they cast Susan Sarandon, but they didn't change the surname. Go! It's an animation, maybe it works, who knows? But on the other hand, I sometimes feel, particularly I say this to white writers, if you're specifying the race of a character, there better be a reason why. There better be a story reason why. Otherwise, there's an assumption that, hey, here's lots of supporting characters of color, because I've said this one's Asian and this one's black, but everyone who I didn't specify, they're the leads, they're white. And I see that all the time. So it's so double-edged, this stuff. You can go mad thinking about it. And at some point, you just have to sort of live it with some sort of sense of what you're trying to achieve.
Great. I want to go to the floor. I do also want to mention, because I think it's important to me, that diversity also doesn't just denote race, that I think that we have a deficiency in people that have disabilities and people that are maybe transgender in a lot of other ways. And I don't think we often talk about it in panels about diversity. Like there is not a disabled person here. There is not, those kinds of things. And I know that a lot of you are writers or wanting to produce your own work, and I think it's important to think about the full meaning of diversity or not, non-traditional casting, to not just mean that you have a person of color on your team or in your script. I think that it means it's definitely a broader definition.
Oh yeah.
And that they're at the table.
Sure.
That's the biggest thing is like there's some shows that I've seen recently that it just seems like there's a black person on the stage, but there couldn't have been a black person in that room.
Right.
To vouch for that story. Mm-hmm. And there's also this misconception that making space means replacing. And I'm not asking for, us to remove a white person from the table. I'm saying add a chair, extend that table, and let's have a conversation.
Yeah, totally.
That's to just be clear about that.
Yeah. All right, how do we go to the floor?
Wow. Wow.
I had like
This is
10
your
more
job.
questions, FYI.
A
but I
paper
just
towel
didn't
or
need
something?
that
I just spilled coffee everywhere.
The custodians are standing by.
Oh no! Come on! Thank you.
The custodians are gonna.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to make a mess. Thank you for the napkins.
She gave napkins.
Great.
You
Yeah,
get
let's go right
napkins.
here.
Oh, we'll kind of get to you.
We'll get you.
Go ahead, this.
Okay, I'll be the white guy that wasn't on the panel, and I'm a boomer. I've written. My name is Malcolm from England, although I live here, and I've written a musical comedy about corporate corruption, and part of the intention was about archetypes. Now, one of the challenges with archetypes is the CEO bully. Of course, he's a white guy. So let's just stop there for a second. So we want to use diversity. If you then assign that role to somebody of color, then you could argue then you're putting a pejorative perspective on them playing this bastard boss yelling at everybody, because their whole life they've been in the opposite role, at the bottom trying to work their way up. So could one of you answer the question about how you assign diverse roles without stereotyping people and just being completely blind to their background? So, for example, I could put in somebody who's a lesbian, CEO boss who's a bully, but then you say, why did you have to have somebody there who was a bitch? You understand the challenge?
Yeah.
My
Thank
question
you.
is the ethnicity of the character ever mentioned?
Not at all. Never.
I think if we're going to be brave and change the perspective, we have to
Yes.
make those choices. There are lesbian, queer, black CEOs that are bitches. I mean, they exist. Like we can't operate in fear in the past and present, right? We have to make the character. If a Latino or Asian person walks in the room and they're great for it, don't have that fear. And I think that fear is what allows the system to stay the same.
Yes.
We can't have both. We can't be like, we want more roles, but not the mean ones, or not the. We'll never get there. You know what I mean?
I mean, but it is a double-edged sword because, like, I feel like, sorry that I keep going back to Frozen, but I feel like the Kristoff, they were okay with making him a person of color, but not the Hans. Hans is the villain, and so then it's like, oh, you're villainizing the person of color. Like that is just something it's a perspective that is in our minds because of the past. But in order to change that, and you might, you have to give that person the best person for the job, or if you want to make it a person of color, like not be afraid to do that, because it's a role, and we want you to play it, and it's not about your color, but you have to be brave enough to just go ahead and do that, and break the norm.
Let's go to this one right here with the glasses. Sorry, I don't know how many mics there are. One. Okay.
I love having a diversity panel. Yes, I'm not part of what you are all up there, and I really applaud what you have been able to do and what you are doing to make it more diverse. But there is a subject that should be added to the diversity panel, which is people of age. People who are of my age. I'm 63. I have worked 63 hard years to be 63. And I want credit for every damn one of them.
Yeah.
But the thing is that age is not considered a diverse category. When we have diversity programs, they all end at the age of 35. So I think when you're dealing with a character, when I would like to have writers, when they are creating characters, to not think about whether the person is black, white, Hispanic, whatever, gay, lesbian, disability. But if you can't be also of a certain age, shall we say, as well, add more characters that are a little older. So I've said my piece.
Fair.
Can we pass the mic down to
Yeah.
our
The lady who
generous
brought
napkin
the
lady,
napkins,
please?
yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Swazette, and I believe in diversity. I grew up in a diverse background. My father was Jewish, and I believe in keeping the feast. One of the things that I want to see on stage is diversity as a whole in relationships. That is just not black and black or white and white, but diversity in marriages. And I think that we don't see that a lot on stage. And different cultures that are blended. So I'm actually working on a gospel musical, and I'm crossing cultural barriers with that. And I don't want to share everything right now about it, but it's something that I've never seen on Broadway. And it's diversity in the arts, and I plan to give a lot of people jobs with it.
All right.
And we'll
Come
take
on.
them.
Can I take
Yeah.
I've got my 16 bars ready to audition.
Great. Let's try to keep them to questions, just so that we can answer more specifically. Go ahead. You can. Yeah.
I just want to address a couple things and then ask you a question. There are quite a few wonderful theater off Broadway and regional theaters and theaters in New York, like the Classical Theater of Harlem, that I worked at, that are terrific, that are diverse, that are leading and paving the way, and they need to be applauded today. And I want to applaud Ty Jones, who's the producing artistic director. Are you aware of Ty? And the work they do at the Classical Theater of Harlem. They have African-American composers there, a very diverse cast. Also, the Theater for the New City. Every year, the touring show, they go to every park in New York City and perform their street theater, composed by Joseph Vernon Banks, African-American. I recently performed at the Old Globe. I go in and out of very big shows and off of Broadway and television, addressing this woman here. Wonderful show, Guys and Dolls, at the Old Globe in San Diego. So you would think to yourself...
Which character? Because I auditioned for that.
I played Big Julie. But they had Nathan and Adelaide interracially cast. And they had both the Lover interracially cast. It was a wonderful production. And the audience is predominantly white at the Old Globe. Let's call it the truth, right? And most of the time, sadly, when I do tour around the country, my audiences that I perform for, I'm taking curtain calls in front of white audiences. So there's two guilty parties here. It's the producing artistic directors at these theaters across the country who are not reaching out to African-American communities and communities of color to bring them into their theater, to be in the audience, and then change the dialogue on stage. They're thinking, oh, we're just going to produce these shows for a white audience. It's not true. They're not making the effort to get people of color into the theater. And that is a sad thing that we should talk about today. They're not making the effort to draw people in. And I performed in the South, and I want you to address that, sir. I want you to address that.
Well, I think, and this is going to flip your mind a little bit, the fact that you were doing Guys and Dolls proves my point, which is that Guys and Dolls is an American musical that was originated during a time of oppression for people of color in the theater. So in the canon, they're not used to even thinking, forget the audiences, the fact that Guys and Dolls is done 50 to 100 times around the country every year, it's a staple. But that staple was originated with a cast mostly of white people. And that becomes the level, the standard for musical theater. As someone who emails daily to artistic directors, they have to balance their subscription base and sell, and I understand how that can be difficult. But there also is not, I don't know of an initiative for writers of color specifically in New York City that only is dedicated to that work. I don't know of that. And that's where the work begins, really in development.
I think it's also like, it's beautiful that we are now, people of color are being thought of like, oh, you can play this role that's usually played by a white person because it actually doesn't matter. That it's nice for us to be invited into those spaces, but it's even nicer for you to seek out stories that are new stories that were written for people of color, or are new characters that can be explored by people of color, and not characters that were created, originated, written for our white counterparts. And now you're including us, so clap, clap to you, because now you let us play Adelaide and you let us play. Yeah, so it's just like, invite us into that writing room, invite us into these stories, so that the stories that we put up here are actually about people of color, or include us in the foundation of these characters, so that then those shows become staples, and then your audience sees that, oh, that's a story about this, or that's a character that was originated by this person of color, or this, and then they're like, oh, we want to go see it. But then you see Guys and Dolls on the season, and you're like, oh, this is a show that's usually played by a full cast of white people, or it's a show that's not really, I can see people up there that I can see myself in, but I don't actually physically see myself represented on that stage. So I feel like that when we're trying to get people of color into the audience, we want to come and see ourselves represented in positive ways. We also want to come and see ourselves as the lead, and not just as ensemble person number 3 in the back corner that you see in one scene, and now you're diverse. It's like you have to include us in sorry.
We are actually out of time, which is very sad. It went so quickly, but I want to give you a chance to speak to any of this if you wanted to. I didn't know if you.
Oh, I was going to demand an actual, like a quick question, one fast question, and I'll answer it because I feel like there were lots of statements.
I don't know if we have time for that.
One fast question?
Okay,
Good.
great. One.
We
fast-
got
Promise
time.
it's a question. Promise it's a question. So,
Okay, you.
So I'm from India and I come from a colonial history, and I did have an opportunity to study here, and most of my education was in history and theater. And I believe theater makers should exercise their conscience because it could create revolution. But I feel the most underrepresented stories in America is Native American. And I think why is it completely comfortable to do Shakespeare, that comes from a colonial ancestry, and not tell the stories which makes us not actually recognize the colonial past of this country. And it's from politics to theater. That community is completely underrepresented. And why is that? Why don't theater makers question that? Because we could manifest that change, but I think doing writers even academically, we study Shakespeare, which is some sort of a colonial imperialism to academics itself. And I think that is something that really lacks, and America does not want to sort of bring that discomfort to the white supremacist nature. So, and the structure of storytelling is very different. We go pre-colonization. And that would be my question. Why is theater not bringing that discomfort to the society that we live in, to the politics? And why is that branch of people constantly being eradicated from mass media, though we live on their land and the past is a genocidal past that we lived in? Yeah.
I'm going to say quickly, money. And everybody else talk. No, go ahead, answer, y'all.
And part of that, you said, part of my answer is being the change we wish to see. So in these issues that we see, and we're like, we don't have enough stories about Native Americans. We don't have enough stories about this. We don't have enough people behind here. So what can you do? And sometimes it doesn't feel like we can do much, but we have to start to ask ourselves, what can we do to help bring this problem to awareness to people, and what can we do to change it? I feel like that is what we should ask ourselves with all of these questions that we have, and with all of the lack of this or that. Like, what can you do to start that? And then who else can you get on board? And then how do we create this change together?
Yeah. Excellent.
Money.
Yeah, unfortunately, we do have to wrap this up. I'm sorry. This is one of those panels that should be twice as long.
Right?
Because there's so much to discuss. So hopefully next year we can do this again and involve all kinds of folks on the panel. But thank you very much
you
for your
guys.
thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here.